Namaste. Myself Rohini Khurana, Assistant Professor, Faculty Physiotherapy and Diagnostics, JVM Rajasthan. Today we are going to discuss about History and Examination Part 4. Neuromuscular System Examination. Examination of neuromuscular system or function consists of testing reflexes, tone, active motion, strength, and coordination. Limited understanding and cooperation in infants and young children requires adaptation of traditional methods of testing. After 4 to 5 years of age, the standard examination is generally applicable. In infancy, reflex testing include age-appropriate responses that reflect early immaturity and subsequent maturation of the CNS. In newborns and young infants, stage of alertness, activity, and comfort influences muscle tone, especially 13 to 16 years. If the baby is anxious, upset, restless, or crying, this part of the examination should be postponed. Valid assessment may require several attempts. In the first few months of life, flexor tone predominates. Hypotonia or hypotonicity signals neurologic abnormalities. Increased tone is the symptom of corticospinal or basal ganglion damage. Myopathy, cerebral dysfunction, and lower motor neuron lesions due to anterior horn disease, neuropathy, or spina bifida all can result in hypotonia. However, a hypotonic stage usually precedes the appearance of increased tone in anoxic brain damage. This stage of hypotonicity tends to last longer in dyskinetic cerebral palsy than in spastic types. On passive motion of hypotonic muscles or extremities, no resistance is felt. Infant with generalized hypotonia is limp and floppy with handling, and in severe cases may feel like a rag doll, which is a descriptive term for this finding. In hypotonia related to motor unit disease or lower motor neuron lesion, deep tendon reflexes are diminished or absent. In contrast, they are present or increased in floppy infants during the transient hypotonic phase of CNS damage. Spastic hypotonicity and related postures are influenced by position in space and the effect of gravity. The child should be examined in supine, prone, and vertical positions to elicit typical postures. Perhaps the most dramatic yet common example of this is the increased hip adduction into scissoring, extension of leg with plantar flexion of the feet when a child with spastic cerebral palsy is suddenly lifted into vertical suspension. Resistance to both fast and slow stretching of muscle should be tested to differentiate rigidity from spasticity. In infants and young children, one may use a number of developmental reflexes to examine active movements and strength. The Moro reflex, it includes shoulder abduction followed by forward flexion of the arm. Eliciting palmar or plantar grasp reflexes demonstrates finger or toe flexor function. Asymmetric responses in the upper extremities may suggest Erb's paralysis or hemiplegia. Unilateral or bilateral absence of protective extension response is likewise suggestive of weakness in the respective extremity. A 4-month old infant elevates the head and trunk on extended arms in the prone position. Scapular winging during this activity is a sign of a weak serratus anterior muscle. In older children, the wheelbarrow maneuver demonstrates the same finding. Lifting up under the axilla elicits spontaneous active shoulder depression. When these muscles are weak, the shoulders slide upward, virtually touching the ears. These signs suggest proximal weakness, possibly due to myopathy. Young children often adopt ingenious substitutions or compensatory movements to cope with weakness of particular muscles. With weakness of the deltoid, they may fling the arm forward by momentum or substitute the long head of biceps for shoulder flexion. In advanced shoulder and elbow weakness, they may walk up, arm on the torso, using their fingers to get the hand to the mouth. Combat crawl is a usual way of crawling in lower extremity paralysis. Deformities around a joint commonly reflect an imbalance of strength in muscles acting on the joint. The deformity is in the direction of overpull. Such imbalance may be spastic or paralytic. Now, visual observation. Visual observation during performance of functional activities to detect muscle weakness should consider the child's age and achievements expected for the child's developmental stage. Walking on tiptoe, squatting, and rising without using the arm for assistance, and straight sitting up from the supine position without rolling to prone position or to the side are mastered by children around 3 years of age. Thus, inability of younger children to perform these activities in a mature pattern should not be interpreted as weakness of plantar flexion, hip and knee extensors or abdominal muscles. Now, testing for Trendelenburg sign and grading the triceps urae by having the child rise on the toe of one leg must be deferred until 4 years of age, when children develop adequate balance. The standard technique of manual muscle testing can be used after school age, except in children who have serious behavioral problems or cognitive impairment. The customary grading system of scores from 0 to 5 or 0 to normal is used. Above fair grade, the wide range of normal variations in growth patterns should be considered in judging good versus normal strength. Because children are adept in using substitution for movement, the examiner must pay special attention and adhere to precise technical conduct of testing individual muscles. Side by side comparison may detect even mild neurologic weakness. Although disuse atrophy or mild bilateral neurological weakness may escape detection. Quantitative strength determination with comparison of both sides is helpful to demonstrate unilateral disuse atrophy in such strong muscles as the quadriceps. This determination is particularly advisable in teenage athletes after knee injury. Resumption of training for competition before virtually equal bilateral quadriceps strength is regained predisposes them to recurrent injuries. Testing of strength in upper motor neuron lesions requires the well-known consideration for position in space and orientation of head and major joints. which may affect recruitment of motor units and produce synergistic movement patterns. A common sign of central movement disorder is impaired coordination. Proprioceptive sensory loss or parietal lobe syndrome may contribute to incoordination. Movement abnormalities associated with cerebral dysfunction, basal ganglion disease, dyskinetic disorder, or spastic incoordination present with specific distinguishing signs. The detection of a coordination deficit is based mostly on observation of gross and fine motor function in children less than 2 to 3 years of age. Concurrent mild delay of motor development is not unusual. After 3 years of age, the examination becomes more specific for testing the quality of performance in complex and more advanced developmental skills. Around 3 years of age, the child can walk along a straight line, unsteadily placing one foot in front of the other. In comparison, facility at tandem walking at 5 years of age is a good example of continuing refinement of motor skills with age. The pediatric physiatrist may be asked to evaluate the appropriateness of coordination in children without an overt physical disability. Clumsiness of handwriting and drawing, difficulties in physical education or sports, subtle signs may be present. Such children may have a major incompetence of apraxic nature, sometimes related to visuomotor perceptual deficit. It also may be associated with learning and behavioral dysfunction. A number of tests are available for examining motor proficiency and dexterity in children without physical disability. Tasks to evaluate youngsters with minor neurologic dysfunction include limitation of gestures, hopping, hand clapping, and pegboard performance. That's all about neuromuscular system. Now moving towards musculoskeletal system examination. Examination of the musculoskeletal system includes inspection and palpation of bones and soft tissues, measurement of active and passive joint range of motion, and assessment of stance and gait. It is a complementary to neuromuscular assessment. As in the previous part, only developmental variations are discussed. Now, the bone configuration and joint mobility changes during growing years. Full-term infants may lack as much as 25 degrees of elbow extension because of predominant flexor tone. In contrast, joint hyperextensibility and hypotonia allow increased passive motion in preterm infants. The scarf sign is a good example of excessive joint mobility in premature babies. Holding the infant's hand, the examiner draws one arm across the chest like a scarf toward the contralateral shoulder. In premature infants, the elbow crosses the midline, indicative hypotonic laxity of the shoulder and elbow joints. Full-term neonates have incomplete hip extension with an average limitation of 30 degrees as a result of early flexor tone predominance. The limitation decreases to less than 10 degrees by 3 to 6 months. At birth and during early infancy, hip external rotation exceeds internal rotation. With the resolution of early hip flexion attitude, internal rotation gradually increases. Differences between bilateral hip abduction, apparent shortening of one leg, and asymmetric gluteal and upper thigh skin folds are highly suggestive of congenital or acquired hip dysplasia or dislocation. Alignment of femoral neck in neonates is consistent with prenatal coxa valga and increased anteversion. Femoral inclination is 160 degree and the angle of anteversion is 60 degrees. Respective adult measurement of 125 and 10 to 20 degrees develop postnatally and are accelerated by weight bearing. Persistent fetal configuration in non-ambulatory children with physical disabilities enhances the effect of neurogenic muscle imbalance on the hip joint and contributes to acquired hip dislocation in spina bifida and cerebral palsy. The popliteal angle is 180 degrees in the hypotonic preterm infant compared with 90 degrees in full-term neonates. A combination of increased flexor tone and retroversion of the proximal tibia causes this limitation of knee extension in mature newborns. By 10 years, tibial retroversion resolves spontaneously. An early varus configuration of the tibia contributes to the physiologic bow leg appearance in infancy and corrects itself by 2 to 3 years of age. Normal variations of stance and gait should not be mistaken for pathology in the growing child. Gait abnormalities evident on clinical observation include asymmetric stride length and stance phase in hemiparesis, toe walking and scissoring with lower extremity spasticity, crouch posture and gait in diaplegic cerebral palsy, Trendelenburg's gait in motor unit disease and hip dislocations, gastrocnemius limp with lack of push-off in L4 to L5 weakness due to spina bifida, and various types of gait deviations associated with involuntary movements such as ataxia, tremor or dyskinesia or in dysfunction of the CNS. Now moving towards sensory examination. A complete examination of all peripheral sensory modalities is possible only in older children. Nevertheless, some modalities can be tested in infants and young children and provide significant information. An infant who cries and screams to move away from pinprick obviously perceives pain. A sleepy infant may be slow to respond and requires repeated stimuli. Withdrawal of the leg from painful stimuli may represent the triple flexion spinal withdrawal reflex in thoracic spinal cord lesion and should not be mistaken for active movement and presence of sensation. Comparing the infant's reaction to pinprick on the arms or face differentiates actual sensory perception in such cases. Older infants respond to touch and vibration by turning toward or moving away from the stimulus. The presence of superficial reflexes signals an intact afferent and efferent reflex arc. The neurosegmental levels are T8 to T12 for abdominal reflexes, L1 to L2 for cremasteric reflex, and S4 to S5 for the anocutaneous reflex. In spina bifida, absence of these reflexes generally coincides with sensory deficit in the respective dermatomes. In young children who cannot be tested for proprioceptive function, ataxia and incoordination may suggest absence of this sensation. Testing of position sense is usually reliable by school age. Cortical sensory function is impaired in parietal lobe damage. The most frequent childhood example is hemiparetic cerebral palsy. Disappropriate knee, poor spontaneous function, neglect, and visual monitoring during use of the arm and hands are suspicious signs. Objective evaluation is generally feasible after 5 to 6 years of age using the same technique as in adults for stereognosis, two-point discrimination, and topognosia with single or double sensory stimulation. Testing for graphesthesia may be attempted by using a circle or square. Around 8 years of age, the traditional number identification gives more accurate information. Cutaneous sensation and proprioception must be intact, and adequate cognitive ability is a prerequisite for testing cortical sensory function. The child's age and ability to cooperate need to be considered in the examination of special senses. Moving a bright light or attractive object across the visual field is used to test vision in infants. At 1 month, the infant will follow to midline, and at 3 months from side to side through a 180-degree arc. A Steiker test and illiterate e-chart are useful for screening preschool children at risk for visual deficit. At an early age, unilateral impairment or loss of vision and visual field defects such as hemianopsia are more likely to remain undetected than the bilateral deficits. A child with strabismus or suspicion of diminished vision should see an ophthalmologist as soon as the problems are discovered. Early treatment with eye patching or corrective lenses is necessary to prevent amblyopia ex anopsia or suppression amblyopia, partial loss of vision caused by cortical suppression to prevent diplopia. Central dysfunction of visual attentiveness, discrimination, and information processing may be misinterpreted as diminished vision, and it requires both ophthalmologic and neuropsychological investigations. Cortical visual impairment usually shows improvement over time. Screening of auditory function is a routine procedure in the neonatal nursery, pediatric office, and the schools too. The examination of handicapped infants and children also should include a simple screening of hearing, arresting the blink or startle reflex, responses to hand clapping, to speech of conversational loudness or whisper, perception of finger rubbing near the ear, and reaction to tuning fork, bell, or cricket toy are methods of testing. Absent, lost, or delayed speech, articular deficits, inattentiveness to sound, a history of recurrent otitis media, head injury, or failure to pass the screening test indicates a need for complete evaluation of auditory function. Now moving towards functional evaluation. The pediatric rehabilitation examination is meaningless if physiatrist doesn't construct from it a coherent picture of child's functional achievements. This evaluation both complements and integrates the variety of information derived from all phases of examination. The developmental diagnostic evaluation is a convenient, functionally oriented assessment tool for infants and preschool children. Language, fine motor and adaptive skills, gross motor abilities, and personal social behavior are the four major areas of function in the organizational framework of developmental testing. The same functional domains are considered in the evaluation of older children and adolescents. However, in these age groups, The examination includes a wide range of developmental expectations and abilities to function in school and society. ADLs and gross mobility skills need to be assessed in this context. In addition to speech, testing of language function includes other modes of communication: reading, writing, spelling, and if indicated, augmentative communication too. Drawing, design construction, arithmetic problems, and questions about handling hypothetical situations in daily life offer a brief preliminary insight into cognitive and learning abilities. A number of specific assessment instruments were designed for various childhood disabilities. These instruments are useful functional assessment tools for their designated condition and appropriately complement the customary development evaluation. Now, the informing interview. Informing the family about the findings of the examination and their implications is an important responsibility of the physician. Factual information must be impaired with a caring attitude. Informing the parents about a newly established diagnosis should be considered as crisis intervention. I repeat, factual information must be imparted with a caring attitude, and information the parents about a newly established diagnosis should be considered as crisis intervention. A diagnostic label is insufficient without explanation of its meaning. The parents need to know the essential prognosis, including uncertainties of early prognostication, particularly in CNS dysfunction, with the possibility of multiple handicaps. Further needs in care and functional rehabilitation should be outlined. One should emphasize the need to avoid focusing on the physical disability alone and to consider the child's development and social needs. Effective counseling and communication skills are essential for establishing a partnership between the physician and family to ensure the successful outcome of a comprehensive rehab program. So, the information for ongoing support is crucial. Thank you.